Message Live. To make sure that you don't miss anything we're doing, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, make sure that you turn on notifications. You don't want to miss a thing.
Hi everybody, welcome to Mates on a Mission. It's fantastic to have you with us. Today we are joined by Pastor Glyn Barrett, Senior Pastor of Audacious Church and the National Leader of the Assemblies of God in Great Britain. Thanks for joining us, Glyn.
Thanks, buddy. It's good to be with you. I brought my customary plant, which, seems to be customary in all these sorts of things these days, but it's great to be with you today.
It's all about the backdrop, isn't it? So many people are spending so much effort trying to perfect the best kind of backdrop. I like that you've gone with the simple plant. So I like that.
I want to know if you've read the fifth book along on your shelf right behind you on the left-hand side.
No, definitely not. I don't even think they're real. They're probably like a plastic cover, just pretending it's authentic. So, mate, you've got an Australian accent, but you're born in Manchester. Tell us how that happens.
Yeah, I'm a local boy. I'm Manchester. I'm Manchester through and through. Accent is Australian. Listen, if I go back to Australia, I tend to go back 2 or 3 times a year. If I'm there for a day, my Aussie accent comes in thick and fast. But the story is my mum and dad were pastors. They're from the valleys of South Wales. My dad got saved out of communism, the Socialist Party. In fact, my granddad was one of the national leaders of the Socialist Party in Wales. Wow. The family were miners. So dad got saved out of at the age of 12, went into Bible college in London when he was, I think, around 20 or so, and then began his ministry life. So he planted a church in Mid Wales, went to Gateshead in the northeast, came to Manchester where he was pastoring, and I was born while we were here. And then at the age of 2, my dad went to Australia, obviously took me as well, and grew up in country Australia, and just a city of around 60,000 people, really, but a beautiful city. It's called the Garden City of Australia. And that's where I grew up. That's where I was educated. That's why my accent is what it is. And it was in my early days of being in Australia that I started supporting Manchester City Football Club. It's important to get that in at the beginning. That's why you're interviewing me and not Andy Hawthorne, because we've got a lot to fall out on over football. And then, mate, at the age of 15, my dad moved back to Manchester. So I moved back with him. He was pastoring in the suburbs in Tameside in a place called Ashton-under-Lyne. And I was there for 5 years. Dad said to me 2 things. He said, you're going to have to join the band. And I said, Dad, 2 problems with me joining the band. Number 1, have you seen the band? And it wasn't great. And the second thing I said is, I don't play an instrument. And he said, well, I'll buy you a guitar tomorrow. You got 6 days to learn. So he brought me to downtown Manchester, to Deansgate, to a music shop called Forsyth's, which is still there. Bought me my first guitar for 60 quid, and I learned G, C, and D. And 6 days later was leading worship in church. The other thing he said is, you're going to have to be the youth leader. I said, Dad, well, there's hardly any youth. He goes, precisely, you're wearing the jeans, you've got the job. And so that was it. Then at the age of 20, I went back to Sydney, Australia to go to Bible school, read theology for 3 years, married my Latin American bride, and then moved back to the UK, to Sheffield, where we were youth pastors for 12 years. And then 13 years ago now, moved back to Manchester and planted Audacious Church. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of our journey.
Mate, there's so much in there that I love. All these beautiful parts of Great Britain, not so much. And then the move across to the Garden City into Australia. And then, wow, all that stuff around, growing up. And that tells you about church planting right there, doesn't it? Where you've almost got to be everything on day one, right into the throw of things. You're the worship leader, you're the youth pastor, you've got to be all things to all people. I just love that. So 2007, you and Sophia, you moved from Sheffield back to Manchester. Oh, by the way, I love that you talk about being a City fan from your youth rather than the glory hunters that we see nowadays. I noticed how you put that in there. I find that with City fans, they want to tell us the date that they joined the fan club because they don't want to be seen as just charging after the cash. But 2007...
Listen, even your phrase there, what I noticed about City fans tells me that you are not a City fan. And but thanks for not being rude and insulting on that. No, it's true. When I was 15, actually, when I moved back from Australia to England, I got my first season ticket in the Kippax in the old Main Road stand. So, that's kind of the season. I remember 1987 to 1992. So yeah.
Come on. Just to put the record straight, I'm not a United fan. Because I'm from the Midlands, I inherited my grandfather's team. So I'm actually an Aston Villa fan, which leaves me as like the only Villa fan, well, possibly in Manchester, if not the world.
Well,
yeah.
listen, mate, my auntie told me that my great grandfather was the manager of Aston Villa Football Club for a period of about 5 years.
No.
Yeah, that's what she said. And so she kept saying to me, she said, you could get a lifetime membership at Aston Villa. And I was like, yeah, I could do, but.
Maybe you could get me a lifetime membership at Aston Villa. That'd be the thing, bro.
Okay.
Hook the guy up. Let's talk about what you were carrying though when you moved from Sheffield, and that was a big job, right? You're right at the heart of probably the biggest church in Sheffield at the time. You know, what were you carrying? What was God speaking to you about for you to move to Manchester and begin to church plant? What was going on there?
I think what happens is when God is bringing you into a new season or to a new day, he really places a burden on your heart. So every time I would drive from Sheffield to Manchester Airport to fly somewhere, every time I was in Manchester, driving past Manchester, had any connection with Andy Hawthorne, the Message Trust whatsoever, every time I drove into Manchester, my heart was just genuinely burdened for the city and couldn't escape it. And every time I drove within the city limits, I felt like I was coming home. And it just genuinely reached a point where we couldn't escape it anymore. And the journey that God brought us in terms of being in Manchester was sovereign. God spoke to my wife and I. We prayed about it once and then left it to God and said, God, if you want us to go to Manchester, you're going to have to speak to the man of God in our life, our pastor. And so it was actually 3 years later that our pastor then suggested that my wife and I should maybe come to Manchester and start a church. So, you know, we always had a big dream. And I think that we were leaving a large church and always had a view that we weren't coming to a small church. We were going to pioneer a large church. So with a large mindset, with a vision, actually, the vision statement to be a church that stops the traffic, numerically so large that it creates traffic jams on Sunday. And that is really, if you talk to our people, I'll say, what's the vision statement? And they'll tell you it's a church that stops the traffic. And I think for me, the analogy is this, is when City or United are playing on a Sunday or any day of the week, there's traffic jams and you can't get anywhere and everybody knows football is on. So when people say to me, what does revival look like in Manchester? I say traffic jams. So many people going to churches on Sunday across our city that a visitor into Manchester stuck in traffic gets the attention of a local and says, hey, what's going on? A City or United playing today? And the local says, no, haven't you heard? God is back. So it's kind of this whole idea. And so that's really been the strategy. Let's work hard to become a church that influences the city and the region at large, but by focusing on the individual and the individual people working out the call of God for their lives.
Wow, I love it, mate. In fact, I've been to your church just a couple of times and I'd be able to tell you the vision of your church. You know, it's explicitly clear. I always think that is the sign of a growing, thriving church where vision is so like right at the forefront of everything that you do. I just think it's fantastic. You know, I've seen the picture. I think it's like there's like a kid, a baby or something, big glasses, and in the mirror specs is like traffic jams, right? I mean,
right.
I've seen the vision. It's ace. So vision is right at the heart of all you do, an essential part of leadership. Just thinking about how your church has grown so significantly over the past 13 years. I mean, you know, your website would tell me you've got 4,000 people. I don't even know how many that might be across, you know, the lockdown period with your content now online. But talk to me about the leadership gifting. Has it grown as the church has grown? Have you had to invest in yourself and in your gifting? You know, when I read the scriptures, there's passages that talk about leaders of tens, of 50s, of hundreds, of thousands. Have you always been a leader of thousands, or has that gifting grown? And if so, what have you had to do? What have you had to do to grow your gifting? Tell me.
Yeah, I think leadership gifting definitely grows, and it comes down to every individual to be responsible for honing that gift and developing that gift. Several things I think are really important is I think that every Christian leader and pastor needs to deal with their stuff, their insecurities, their foibles, their weaknesses, and let me say it again, their insecurities, because I think that sometimes our insecurities are the biggest barrier for us growing and increasing. So one of the ways that I've really tried to focus on that is to seek a way to become the smallest fish in the biggest ocean. So to be in rooms where the people I'm talking to have visions and practices and ministries that are so much bigger than where we're at, that we are continually dwarfed in scale. So, this new building that we're building in the city centre is around a £40 million project or so. And so what I've sought to do is sit with people who are building £300 million projects around the world. So when I'm talking about, faith for 40 million, they're talking faith for 400 million. And they're saying, oh, you only want 40. You can do that. The same God at work. And so just to sit and continually be in those rooms where I'm not known, not celebrated, nobody knows the journey we've been on, to actually absorb the faith, the environment. I think that's that's definitely been a key to helping my mindset grow, my faith expand, etc. I think as well for a Christian leader, so important for every Christian leader to build those right relationships. So to have mentors, to have pastors, leaders who speak into our lives, and genuinely not just accepting what we like, what they say, but even when they bring a rebuke or an encouragement or correction. Because I think one of the things that is certainly happening with this social media generation is we like to tell people what to do, but we don't like to be on the receiving end of instruction from people. So, there are key relationships in my life who say, Glyn, you need to get your act together. Glyn, you can preach better, you can lead better. There's more in you. Come on, step out, et cetera, et cetera. They're really important. But I think, personal relationship with Jesus Christ is paramount importance. And if you are a preacher, you're a Christian, reading the Bible every day as well. There's no substitute for that. You can't get that in a podcast, in a conference, in a church service. You and God, me and God is really important. And then, personal commitment for growth and leadership training development. So I'm currently doing a Masters of Leadership. I'm in my final year of that, which has copious amounts of reading and study and writing and research. And that's really all about me investing into my gift, trying to hone it and develop it to a greater capacity. So reading a different diet of books to maybe what I would usually read. I love, for example, church history. That's my go-to stuff. But doing this Masters in Leadership is forcing me to read a whole wide spectrum of things. So I think they're important aspects.
I've got so many questions that I want to follow up on. You talk about church history. How has your understanding of church history informed the way in which you're leading now? Have you got any views on that one?
I think there's a real sense in church history where there's nothing new under the sun. And I know that Solomon said that. So people tend to freak out in moments like a global pandemic. But yeah, it's happened before. People tend to freak out with persecution in social media, or the feeling where our religious liberties are being slowly taken away from us. Well, yeah, it's happened before. And the church is still here, and God is still good, and God is still on the throne. And I think church history reminds me that ultimately what Jesus said is true. He will build his church. That it's not our job. It's not your job. He's going to build his church. We just simply have to do what Isaiah said. Here I am, send me. So if we can be available and actually trust God, and here's the big one, actually be Christians with the fruit of the Spirit. I think in watching social media, in hearing Christians debates online, you see everything regarding Brexit and politics in America and everything, and you listen to some Christians and you watch some Christians and you think, really? Are you really wanting to bring your Christian expression to this militance and this anger? What happened to love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, long-suffering, self-control? What happened to the fruit of the Spirit? And maybe church history will teach us that metaphysically, God is on the throne. The big picture is that we win because he is the winner. God is the winner. Jesus Christ has authority over death and hell. Then why the freak out? Let's relax, knowing that God's going to get us through this. And even if our mortal body dies, The body stops, but the spirit simply steps, because eternity is right now. Church history is fascinating. I love the early fathers. What a brilliant subject to study.
Fantastic, mate. Thanks so much. I love your wisdom on that. I love when you were talking earlier, you talked about being a small fish in a big sea, almost the inverse of the big fish in a small pond, right? I imagine that's the analogy there.
Yeah.
And you talked around about surrounding yourself with significant leaders, people with a bigger faith and a bigger vision, maybe than even yourself. So talk to me about who's influenced your life, which leaders or which leader has had the greatest impact on your life to date?
Can I give you 4 very quick names?
Yeah.
The first one being my father. My father, he's the church that I grew up in, and he was a theologian. He was a 5-point Calvinist, which vexed me greatly. But just a gentleman in ministry. Very kind, a great Bible teacher. Definitely, he has been a major influence in my life. My first pastor that I served under after Bible college, Pastor Dave Gilpin, who's just recently relocated from Sheffield back to Australia. He's taught me out of the box thinking. When you hit an obstacle, don't allow the obstacle to be the biggest thing. What's the solution? Think solution. My now pastor, who speaks into my life from a point of view of impartation, is Pastor Russell Evans, who leads a ministry called Planet Shakers. He's based in Melbourne. Just a huge ministry gift to the body of Christ. Incredibly prophetic, incredibly kind, very insightful, but impart something. Impartation is when something's happened, you've been changed, but you just don't know why. Until later you reflect back and go, oh, that's what God did in that moment. That's what I call impartation. And of course, being an Aussie, being in Bible college all those years, I was in the National Assemblies of God Bible College of Australia, called Alpha Crucis. But I really grew up in a world where Youth Alive in Australia and obviously Hillsong became huge. And so being in and around Pastor Brian Houston's life for the last 25 years has been brilliant, because you just see Hillsong keeps stepping, keeps growing, keeps expanding. And that really comes down to the man at the helm, which is Pastor Brian. So those 4 people would be some of the major influences in my life.
Those are significant men. Wow, incredible. Yes, brilliant. Thank you so much. So you talked also about your building project, £14 million. That's a big ship that you're building. But tell me the vision behind it and how that fits with the wider vision for Audacious, not just one church now, but numerous congregations across the Northwest. How does a big building right at the epicenter, right in this town, the city centre of Manchester, fit with the wider vision of what you're planning for the church? Yeah,
great question. Our vision is to be a church that stops traffic. So that's the clear image piece in people's minds. Vision always, is a clear image of a preferable future. And so if you can encapsulate vision into a picture, I think that really helps people to embody that. But the further outworking of our vision statement is to be the type of church that influences the city and the region in the main, we call them gateways of society. So education, healthcare, business, etc., sports, entertainment. And we kind of really designed our building on the basis of what would it look like to have a building that can become a major source of influence for those 7 major areas in our city. So it's not just about creating a worship center. The auditorium will seat around 2,400 people. We'll have a small hall of around 1,000 seats, and then lots of breakout rooms as well. But it's more about what the ancillary rooms will provide in terms of empowering people to become key influencers in the 7 major gateways, mountains, in the city and in the region. So that's really what it's about. That we're calling it the new cathedral. It's a bit audacious, but there you go. Some people like it, some people don't. And because there needs to really become a resource center, almost like the old, if I can use the analogy, where the parish churches were supplied by the cathedral. The resources would flow from the cathedral out into the parishes, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really a modern interpretation of what we've seen happen for many, many hundreds of years in our nation. There's a brilliant building actually in the city centre. It's a German beer house right now down the front, but out the back it's a concert venue, and it used to be a Methodist church hall.
Is that the Free Trade Hall?
Is it not the Free Trade Hall? No. Anyway, it's a concert venue now. I'm anyway, the architect who designed it with the minister of the church at the time, they designed it actually on this basis, being a building that could actually influence people in the major areas of the city. And so actually we've taken that model of design and worked hard on our new cathedral. Not that it's going to look the same, but the outworking is going to be the same. So strong resource centre for cathedrals, as a cathedral, so we can continue to plan both campuses and locations of our church across the nation and into Europe as well.
I love it. And the city needs it, actually. You know, I'm a small church guy, like I'm an estates boy. I want to be planting churches into difficult and tough patches. But actually what I need a cathedral too. I think it's essential, whether you're a house church person or a small church person, or even a medium-sized church. You know, we need to be, we need within the city, I think, a cathedral and a place to gather. I love how generous you are with your building. That space will serve the city, whether that's the poorest in the city. I love what you're doing through Audacious Foundation. That has blown me away, and it's been fantastic to partner with you guys on the Lockdown Hunger Project. I love how you use that space to gather, like the city to pray. I think it's just going to be phenomenal that one of the best venues within the city will be a church, and we can gather the city there in God's name. It's fantastic, mate. I think continue to push on with that. That's so exciting. When will it be ready? Tell us.
Well, we're hoping to actually break ground on it next year. So we've had one or two delays over the last 18 months. We've had different conversations with different developers who've wanted to, you know, have an attempt to achieve certain things within the site as well. So we're just in the process of talking with the city council on a few of the things that we're looking to develop to the site. So middle of next year, mate, I'm really hoping that we're breaking ground and we're starting the initial build. Initial build is going to be 18 months, and we're going to build in different phases along the way. So yeah, it's exciting.
Incredible. Thank you, bud. So tell us, you know, what would you give as advice to your 21-year-old self? You know, you're a few years down the track now, looking back on how your life is going to be, you know, what advice would you give your young self?
Do you know what? I think probably the advice I would give is actually stop and party just a little bit more than you have. I say that because I have a theology of party that's really grown up over the last sort of 10 years or so. I'm 48 years of age now, and probably from my mid 30s, early 30s, I kind of began to understand the concept that there's a theological term for party. It's the word feast, but make no mistake, it's a party. And it's this whole idea. Jesus said, I've come to give you life and life to the full. So I'm talking about the enjoyment of life as well as the busyness of faith, those two things, and learning to celebrate those moments a lot more. You know, my parents are working class background. I'm Spirit Empowered Church. Pentecostal church is a word that most people use. Our movement, Assemblies of God, there's 380,000 Assemblies of God churches globally. It's one of the fastest growing movement of churches in the world. There's a new church being planted every 2-3 days around the world within Assemblies of God. It's phenomenal growth, but our roots are very working class, and I use that to say hardworking, graft. You live, you work, you die, like my forefathers did in the mines, that idea. And so because of that, you're up early, you're to bed late, you work hard. And I just think at 21, just going, you know what, just stop and take the moment to enjoy the wins, celebrate the wins a little bit better, enjoy ministry, Christianity, as well as working hard. So trying to balance those things, I think, would be key.
I think it's so good that, you know, often we talk about the Great Commission, therefore go and make disciples, and this therefore relentless push to go and make disciples. And yes, that is the command of God, but yet the same man who spoke those words also spoke John 10:10, that he came to give us life and life to the full. So they have to be compatible, don't they? Life on the go, the going and making of disciples, alongside a life to the full life and disciple making have to be able to exist together, I would say.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And certainly for the background of church that I'm from, we were more known in society for what we couldn't do than what we could do.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? And so because of the Pentecostal holiness movement, you know, you're meant to be in the world, not of the world, but we were of a completely different world. And at times, no earthly good whatsoever, because we were living in a different world. And I think that you know, in a sense, having one foot in God and 1 foot in life in the here and now, and walking that journey of practical, incarnate, missional evangelism is such an important thing. So evangelism not as a program, but evangelism as a lifestyle. Brilliant. So people are genuinely looking at us and going, I don't know what you got, but can I have some of what you've got, please? Yeah. It's that type of idea.
So good, man. So good. Do you feel like, just to finish off, is God saying anything to you right now? You know, in this season, as you're like amid the pandemic, is God speaking anything fresh that you're like hanging on to personally?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to take you back to March, the last Sunday before lockdown happened. So the lockdown happened on the Monday, or was announced by our Prime Minister on the Monday. On the Sunday, I was preaching from the Old Testament, where the man of God was talking to the woman who was barren and saying, this time next year, you will have a child. This time next year. And it's just this real excitement in my spirit that, you know, lockdown has happened. We're still in different forms of lockdown nationally. We're still all wearing masks. It's still a weird, funky world that we're living in, and we're still trying to navigate our way through the challenge. The reality is this, is that God is already in our future, calling us on into a new day. So we can either look at the size of the obstacle, or we can be excited the fact that God is already in tomorrow, already in next year. And for this word that I preached in our church in March, he's already in March 2021, calling us all into a glorious and a bright future. That's not to say there's going to be hardship. That's not to say that there's not going to be, you know, a valley called the shadow of death. But what is superb about Psalm 23 is that he walked through the valley of shadow of death. He didn't opt out. So I just think if we have confidence that we just keep on walking, the hope we have in Jesus Christ is that he's calling us all into a glorious future. And I am personally very excited for our local church and for the churches across our city and region that our best days are yet to come.
Come on, mate. What a great way to finish. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your understanding. Really grateful for your time, mate. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. And all my love to all the viewers and listeners out there too.
Cheers, bud.
We hope that you enjoyed the show. Make sure you don't miss out on what's coming up on Message Live. All you need to do is like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click the bell to receive notifications and the latest news of Message Live.